And then we can start with our first person. So Brandon Collins, are you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
knock this out. All right. Hello,
perfect.
everybody. Brandon Collins from the Media and Popcorn Podcast.
Hello.
Fantastic film. It was one of my favorites from watching at AFI, and I just recently watched it in preparation for this. I wanted to know, this specifically for Darius, and then everyone else can chime in. What was the creative process between you and your creative team to put the audience in Ruben's POV? And particularly two scenes that stuck out at me were one when he first discovers that he might be hard of hearing, and then later on when he gets the cochlear implant put in.
Well, I mean, I'll try to be brief here because it'd be really great to hear from you guys. But I think one of the main things that I focused first of all in gathering a team for this project, which took years, in fact, and was so important, was finding not just people who were top level in the various things that you guys do, but everybody here is a storyteller. And I think we spent a lot of time, these guys, everyone here told the story and enriched the story beyond myself and my imagination. And that's part of, I feel, what I see and feel on the screen. So it's really, I think you guys would all echo that back. I mean, I look at you, J-Dub, and I think about the conversations that we had, that just, these are the things that ended up telling our story, not simply dressing a set. So in really directing those specific questions you just asked about perspective, there's such deep conversations that, Nicolas and I started having years or a year and a half before we even shot around the experiment of sound perspective. And that ended up, and then when you talk about like the merch table, for instance, is where he first loses his hearing. That was a really wild scene because we had to create this utter sense of naturalism and veracity, which has everything to do with, Megan helping us get these guys feeling and looking and living into an utterly real sense of being on the road and being with this band. And that was a band Surfboard that came. So it was all about launching from a place of utter truth into this heavy duty perspective. Now, Nicolas is on set at this time. So we're working with mics and contact mics, and J-Dub, the way that you lived into characters with me as we were working was so enriching. And I find it's just so wonderful to see your faces, so enriching, because you helped grow Ruben. You found Ruben in you. And by the way, you're winning the beard game right now, which is cool. But this is what was so enriching about this process, is it wasn't me saying, here's the story, you do this. It was you guys saying, no, well, this is this character and this and that, and Jade, and it's all over this movie. So by the time that sound design hits in that scene, it's coming from a place of real naturalism and truth. And I think that's what's so exciting for me when I watch the movie, because it's this merging of languages. And maybe I'll just shift it to you guys, because I really want to hear you guys talk.
Maybe what I could say, for me, what was very surprising that Darius it's his first film. Normally, he built an amazing toolbox, so he was able to work with all the different way of writing the story, from sound to set to editing and to have this ability for your first film to be able to combine and to have such a large toolkit was for me the most amazing things. It's very surprising because it's normally things you this kind of relation. You used to have that with old directors, like Alain Resnais or Polanski, like these people who have done so much films, and they know exactly all the possibility of filmmaking. So and also last thing, the other thing was for me the ability to be able to collaborate with Mikkel, with everybody, like the ability we had to be able to be in contact with everybody and get the kind of feedback from everybody, the freedom, we had on the set.
And I'll like push that toward, it's wonderful to have Mikkel here, because while you weren't on set, Mikkel, what your sensitivity to this sound perspective, sound design, and you're such a rigorous storyteller. It's really hard to express this strongly enough. We were trying to do something new here. It was something none of us had seen or specifically heard. So it took a degree of really strong authorship on the part of so many people. And J-Dub, did you want to talk about that character work as it related to sound design and how you thought about that? Oh, you're muted, J-Dub.
I'll unmute myself.
Yeah.
I mean, I would just reinforce what Darius said, that for me, like I'm very lazy, and I like to pick a script where, as I'm reading it, I start to just feel everything and see the movie. And this script was just such an easy yes. It was so expressive, and the story was so beautifully crafted. And then talking to Darius, just found him to be an incredibly generous collaborator and just hungry for the perspective of all the different crafts insofar as they were helping to illuminate the script and the text. And, you know, I can say that almost all of our conversation that I had with Darius was all story conversation. For me, that's, I mean, that's really, I call what I do design for storytelling. It's how I always describe it. So it's like immediately Darius, you know, without having coordinated that, is telling you like exactly like, this is the most important thing. And this is what I found in everybody. And I think that speaks to his, you know, thoroughness and success in sort of choosing a team around him that was all oriented toward the same thing. That I think this story, the meaning was going to have to come out of really plumbing these characters and bringing them to light, and choices being made on that basis rather than an overt stylistic basis, or, you know, just like a programmatic basis that sort of comes from without. Like this one drama like this really grows from within, and that was the essence of the conversation every day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Paul at AFM Magazine.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. The movie is incredible. We loved it. And there's so much to think about, so much to get out of this. And I'm wondering, there are probably people who are having these issues that may see this film and get some inspiration from it. Do you have any sort of words of wisdom or words of inspiration for the people that may be going through something like this and may want to carry on and do their own version of what they were doing before, now facing these problems?
Well, I think in a way what we were working on, and maybe, you know, Mikkel, maybe you could speak to this, because in a way what we were creating is an empathy machine. You know, and I say that because it's almost like putting on a virtual reality headset, in the sense that you're thrust into an experience. And I guess I would hope, rather than the movie moralize or put itself in this place of saying this is what it is or this is what you should take from it, I really hope that people have an experience. That's my main objective. And in so doing, I think people are joined by the commonality of the human experience. That's my greatest hope. And so if people are going through something that's hard, whether it be addiction or codependence or substance or any number of those things that fall under that umbrella, they at least feel conjoined with the rest of humanity, maybe, in watching this. Because that was certainly, I think, the experience that I think a lot of us shared making the movie, is the way that we all fit in to this. But I think, Mikkel, I think about you in this, because you were so instrumental in creating that sense of diligent perspective and diligent empathy.
All right, our next question. Oh, great. Sorry. We're going to move on to the next question.
But you got to get back to Mikkel on that, because that's a good one.
Oh, okay.
No, it's all right. Go ahead. I know we have how much time.
Our next question will be from Niger at Big Gold Belt Media.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for your time, everybody, today. So I kind of want to go talking about when Riz signed on here. He just does such a fantastic job. And I even get a little bit emotional thinking about his performance because he really connects with the audience, and been a fan of his for a while. But when he signed on, how did you all know this was your guy? And what was kind of the emotions going through it, seeing how committed he was in regards to everything that he had to kind of learn and acquire in order for this role?
Just saying a word, there aren't many actors who are up for the challenge that this movie was. And that didn't mean just saying, sure, I'll do it. That meant signing on for a ridiculous process. But, you know, going back to you, Mikkel, do you remember when you first saw footage with Riz? Because that was the first time we spoke, and you had a kind of a fresh perspective on it because you came into it just being able to lay your eyes on this guy for the first time as Ruben.
Yeah, I mean, I just connected with the character immediately, and being able to go inside of the head and experience everything with this character. I could see those eyes and that face just going through that whole process would be super interesting. And the way you just explained that let's go for this journey and see what is actually possible. I have this insane amount of things that I would like to try, and can we actually achieve all this? That challenge for itself was just super interesting with this character, Ruben.
Yeah, and people talk about Riz's eyes, but I think the one thing to remember is that it's not just looking into someone's eyes. It's when someone like a person like Riz builds a foundation for a character that is so diligent and so true and so deep that when you look in his eyes, you see a specific character. You see a guy that was an army brat moving from Texas to Arizona to California. You see a foster child. You see a drummer. You see a former addict, and none of it's ever spoken. That's not about eyes. That's about deep artistry. And that's what we found in Riz, and we're all just lucky. He made us all look good.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you for your question. Next question is for Steven at Bionic Buzz.
Hey everybody, I definitely related a lot to this movie as a former drummer who never wore earplugs, playing forever, and then dealing with hear loss later in life. Definitely not as bad as here. But what research did you do talking to like other people that have dealt with this? Because I feel like this is a great PSA for actually people to wear earplugs. So apparently the hi-hat is like the worst thing for your ear as a drummer.
Brother, you want to talk about that, Brother Abraham?
Talk about nerdy research that we did?
Yes, please.
I mean, it's a little hard to remember it all, but we did a lot of nerdy research. And we first started with, you know, what happens to musicians and all different cases of musicians losing their hearing. And then we also, as we were building the story over years, we started thinking about other ways that people lose their hearing. That happens through all different kinds, through taking antibiotics and losing your hearing through depression and amazingly strange ways of losing your hearing that people go through based on their mental wellness and medicines they take and music. So there was a lot of different research we did as it related not only to the music that Ruben's playing in the film, but also the emotional experience that we were really after.
And Abraham's also a musician, and you were going through some tinnitus while we were writing it, which was super nice of you to provide us with that avenue for exploration. Thank you for that.
Just some empathetic. Yeah.
And also, when Abraham mentions antibiotics, that was our grandmother who took an antibiotic and lost her hearing, and the film is dedicated to her. And so we had this kind of close family experience, and then a lot of research. But I hope how are you doing with your hearing now?
It's better. My left ear is pretty bad, but I can still hear pretty good on my right ear. But Yeah, I didn't know about all the medicine and stuff too. That was good. That was good to learn about. You know,
It's crazy. Thanks for the question, though.
Thank you. Our next question is from Sean at Cineblend.
Hey guys, thank you so much for taking the time. I guess I would love to know some of the practical things that Riz might have done and that you guys might have helped him to do early on in the process for him to really understand hearing loss and to be able to live in it so that he could visualize it better on the screen.
J-Dub, do you remember, I mean, and Nicolas, you were on set for this, and you remember the first time that Riz put in the hearing, we had custom made earpieces. Do you guys remember that experience of watching Riz put those in and what that palpably did on set?
I mean, what is when you speak about an experience, you speak also about a physical experience, you know. And what was such a great idea that Darius want to put to also put Riz in the physical positioning of and feel what would be to lose your hearing for real, you know. And so I remember when he put that, it was like totally lost. And in a way, I mean, like, even if he didn't keep it for all the different takes, I think he kept this memory in his body, you know, as a kind of, you know, important thing, you know, cognitively.
That memory is a great way of putting it, because he had the, you have to understand these earpieces, they emitted a white noise that I could masochistically control on my iPhone, or they would emit like a tinnitus, so that Riz couldn't hear his own voice. And when I think, Nicolas, when you say that, because we shot chronologically, which was such a joy, as I think we all felt the joy of that. We all had this memory of having an experience, rather than it was just lots of scenes that we shot at different times. It was chronological, so we were living the story as we went. And Riz had that muscle memory of every scene, because he had really, like you were saying, physically lived it. And then, of course, Nicolas and all of us and Mikkel and everything, then we recreated that experience later in post.
Thank you very much.
Our next question is from Greg at Deepest Dream /Cinema Addicts podcast.
Hey everyone, this question is for Megan. Megan, just wondering, this Sound of Metal is such an immersive cinematic experience. For you as a costume designer, how did you approach your prep and executing just your own vision for this film? Because ultimately this movie takes place in really several different locations. How did you approach the entire project in a seamless fashion?
No pun intended.
Well, I came to it when I went into the first interview with Darius. I remember talking about, I have this kind of background being pretty deep into the hardcore punk metal scene in the previous stage of my life. And so I came to it from that, and from being inspired from those years I spent going to like dirty basement shows and that kind of thing. And then from there, Darius and I just spent a lot of time talking about how these guys, Ruben and Lou, would be living in the Airstream, would be possibly sharing a wardrobe. You know, the clothes are just strewn all around. They share drawers. They're so deep into their touring and their music, and so immersed by their relationship that there's really nothing outside of that for them. So everything they do in their wardrobe is kind of intertwined, that they would be like doing their own clothing repairs, making their own shirts, you know, stitching patches on everything. So just that coming at it from like a naturalistic perspective in that way. And there are a lot of details because the film is shot so intimately. It's interesting because you see so many t-shirts, but there's so many details that we don't necessarily see in the movie. But I think the actors really felt it in the moment. And when Riz and I were talking about the arc of his character, he goes from wearing all these t-shirts from bands that have deeply inspired and informed his music, like 80s and 90s metal, hardcore, punk bands, kind of obscure bands like Void and Gizem, and then there's Einstürzende Neubauten, which is a huge influence, kind of industrial noise band from Germany that's influenced so many bands. And that he would wear those shirts and wear like his, you know, real beat up boots and his stiff worn in jeans. And then as he comes into the deaf community, he sort of lives into who he is and starts to become more comfortable in this place where he starts wearing t-shirts that are less in your face, and he actually starts wearing a softer kind of a pant, and he wears sneakers. And so it's all those things where even if you don't see them come through in the film, it helps Riz inform who his character is and what he's going through.
Story. It's awesome, Megan. And also, Megan, you have this genius to work with, like Sean Powell, who is, you know, you pulled him in early, and Sean is this drummer in Surfboard in Brooklyn, and a former heroin addict, and just the beautiful, generous soul. So you really had that ability to pull him in and allow for that really legitimate influence, which I think was really brilliant.
Sean was incredible. We actually, I actually stole a bunch of Sean's real articles of clothing for the film, and he was super generous with coming up with some of these bands, what would give this movie its clout, and just coming up with these ideas about how to make Ruben's character and Lou's characters more well-rounded versions that will realistically appeal to people in all walks of life, but particularly people in that scene who might watch the movie. And Sean actually made some shirts for us too. He hand screen printed some shirts, which we then wore down. And so that was awesome. He was invaluable.
Great. Thank you so much for that question. Our next question is from Paula at Goksima Nerd.
Oh, we have a mute on.
Sorry, Paula, we can't hear you.
Hear me?
There you are.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry for that. So it's not every day that we have a movie that talks about music, rock music, but at the point of view of a player who is lost his hearing. So why did you decide that you needed to talk about this, about that kind of story, about that kind of relationship between music and a person, like on Sound of Metal?
Well, I mean, in a way, music and the band plays almost as a metaphor in this movie. And it's interesting. I look over these faces, and I think we all really relate. Everyone here, J-Dub, Abraham, Nicolas, Mikkel, who's a musician and a drummer, and I look at everyone and how deeply they relate. And certainly your story as well about losing your own hearing. And so even within the realm of music, you know, there's a common experience that people share through music. Music's the great connector. But I also think that this idea of a couple in a band is a metaphor for all relationships, which is that, you know, we have our own place within a relationship, and we have, you know, I play the drums and you play guitar, and together we make this music. But what are we if you start pulling those sounds apart? You know, and if you leave, what's left? It's just drums. And what does that mean? And so I think that both Abraham and I were really inspired by that concept of using this band, this two-person band, as a metaphor for a relationship, in fact. And so so in a way, even though the movie is steeped in a very specific music world, it was always the intentionality for it to be very universal in feeling. And Abraham, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would just say the story was always intoxicating because it was like the ultimate alienation that we could go through. It's the ultimate alienation. To be a musician, but really anyone who goes through this hearing loss. And that was intoxicating to see how you can build a story that starts from a place of such loss, and to actually have something that is full of magic and some vague but light that is consistently there. So it was just an intoxicating starting place of crazy alienation.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Our next question will be from Nell Mino, freelancer.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm actually writing this for RogerEbert.com. It seemed to me, of course, we know the sounds that you distorted or that you muted, but it seemed to me that some of the sounds in the early part of the movie, particularly when he was making breakfast, were emphasized in a way that I hadn't seen in a movie before and really made me think about all the information we get from our ears. Can you talk a little bit about the different sounds that you altered in some way?
I love that question because so often we talk about the design, but I think so much of our focus, I'm going to pass this to you, Nicolas, is about the awareness of sound itself. And I think that's the question you're asking. And I just think it's so beautiful and rarely asked. So Nicolas, do you want to talk about the way you approach diegetic sound and versus omniscient? And because I think we spent a lot of time on this.
Yes. I mean, like for me, it's a specific question because I spent 30 years trying to put sound and picture together. So it's so much that it's even hard for me to speak precisely about it because it's like my life and it's so long, you know. So, but what was amazing that I think it's not. It's how the weights have been shot, how the weights have been written, the weights have been edited. So it's not about just putting sound. It's like how everything is working together, you know. And I think we spend a lot of time to find the right arc, you know, between like real sound and like immersive sound, between like to have the right amount of it, to not making it too tiring, you know, like because it could have been very tiring, you know. So we try, and then I think the more you go in the film, at the start, all the shots which are immersive are immersive sonically also, and slowly you start to it's become more and more lighter. You know, sometimes you have like subjective shots, but the sound is normal. Sometimes you have like normal frame and the sound is becoming, you know, subjective, you know. So and then I think to give more and more room to the audience also, you know, because it could have been very claustrophobic to each time use the same kind of tool. So I think all the start is very important because it defines the vocabulary, but then after it's all about trying to give more and more room to the audience to resonate with the story.
But I also think you were also talking about the kind of almost hyper reality of sound. And I think, Nicolas, you focused on this a lot. And I think it's really beautiful because your incredible deep practice of capturing atmos, the natural sound of the world, and you would do with multi-directional mics, almost a three-dimensional hyper-naturalism that we ended up celebrating in the movie in a way that brought your attention, just like you're saying, to the hyper-natural sounds, almost as a meditation on what we ignore in general.
I mean, the starting point is like also, I think I spend a lot of time in my life in nature, you know. So first of all, before to start to link my work to film vocabulary, I really try to recover, you know, to mimic exactly the reality, you know, because I think that if you do that, it's speaking to the people through also their own memory, you know. So it's not about an illustrative or it's not only storytelling wise, it's also you kind of relink the audience to their own bits of memory, you know, of moments that, you know, they had before in their life, you know, like in outside or inside of a room, or, you know, like it's all this moment. So it's connected to potentially all the life of the people who see the film, you know. That was also a bit my idea, you know, about my personal idea about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Michael Berger.
Thank you. I have a two-part question, one for Darius and one for Nicolas. Darius, I love the mercurial way that Olivia Cooke appears in the film, and she's totally different. And at first I was like, where did she come from? And then I realized it was the same actor. And then I'd like you to talk about that and at what point you decide to put that into the film. And then Nicolas, back in the 80s, I played in a band and we had a sound engineer on a recording who had a filter he called Dark Tunnel. Do you have any filters that you have idiosyncratic names for? Thank you both and everybody participating.
I guarantee the answer is yes for that, Nicolas. But I'll quickly answer this. Like I was saying, the chronology of the story was one of the most exciting aspects of it because what it allowed for was real experience. And so one of the things we did is when Olivia, who was so outrageously committed in this role and doesn't get talked about as much as Riz's commitment, but she, you know, everything from learning guitar and pedals and screaming and learning how to do that, which is super hard. She did it all. It was a live show at a concert and then working our way up to saying goodbye to Ruben. Then she said goodbye and she was gone. And that's the beauty of chronology. So she was gone. A goodbye was goodbye. And we weren't going to see her again until she was in Europe. And what that allowed for is that when she came back, it actually surprised me, you know, and my brother and I talked about this a lot and how much we were looking forward to that emotional resonance of that experience, but it actually surprised me, which is my favorite experience when I get surprised, because what she came back with was really, really profound. It was a sense of, I had lived into this family, lived into this story, this relationship, and then I was gone and you guys lived something else and you just went to a deaf community and he just learned sign language and you just had all these rich experiences without me. And I know that happened. So when she came back and when we saw her again for the first time, she was different. Actually, it wasn't just her eyebrows were dark. In fact, her energy was different. Some part of her had moved on. And it was in fact real. And so, and it was even hard. I will tell you, it was even tough emotionally, even off camera, because that had happened. And you feel it and see it on the screen with her. And it's palpable. And I just have a lot of respect for Olivia's process.
Sorry about the sound. I don't know if I exactly understood because I'm French and sometimes I don't get everything. But if you speak about the tunnel effect, it's about like, for me, it's like how to recreate this inner. You want me to say that to inner feeling, like this sound from what you could hear with your body. If you didn't have timpani, you know, hearing. So I think I made a lot of. Naturally, I made also through some films I did before, I did a lot of tests about how to try to understand what you can get, you know, what your body can get, how you can hear with your eventually your skin, with your bones cavities, you know, how your brain is able to recreate, you know, sound from this inner vibration. You know?
And he was also asking, Nicolas, did you have any specific names of filters, like specific processing filters that had weird?
No, I think that there is not so much processing because, you know, we try to, you know, like we try to capture, for example, sound from Riz from his own body, you know. So we did like recordings of his voice through stethoscope mic and contact mic and geophones mic, you know, to be able to understand what was the vibration of the sound in his body. So actually, it's not very processed. It's just like trying to be right, you know. And
you're literally hearing the inside of Riz in the movie. Yeah. And Michael, it was a really amazing process because while oftentimes after a take you would have room tone, people would be getting room tone or getting whatever. You know, Nicolas was actually miking Riz's eyelids and down his throat and in his mouth. And so building a library to work from that was outrageously audacious.
and I think that's what you know, like inconsciously when you're underwater or you're sleeping or you know, that's something, you know, you don't really consciously, you don't know it, but I think your body know it and your brain know it. So I think if you just be able to put the people in the condition of hearing that or feeling that, you know, get this kind of information straight away, it's put the audience in the right positioning.
Perfect. Darius, you can sign off now.
Oh, okay. Do I go somewhere else? Okay. Do I just press leave?
Yes.
Hey, it is so nice to see you guys all. That wasn't a good sentence, but that was really, really fun. Okay, see you soon.
Thank you. And then we'll move on to the next question from British Film Institute, Anjana.
Sorry, the question was actually for Darius, but I think I've just missed him. So, is it okay to still ask it?
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. One of the aspects of the film I found really interesting was the subject of the deaf community itself, and the sort of idea of the community feeling in terms of identity, and that there isn't a sense of loss. It's a community that you're a part of, and they don't feel a sense of loss. And I found it really interesting. And I was just wondering what the sort of process was in terms of working with the deaf community and exploring that theme of identity and who Ruben is in that community, and especially a scene with Joe, where he actually tells him he's had the surgery. I thought that was a very interesting moment of fracture, and I was just wondering how that was explored in terms of the research and working with the actors.
Well, I would just say Darius would give you a different answer, but he might start with Jeremy, who Riz worked with for I don't know how many months, maybe 7 months, learning sign, becoming fluent in sign. And that was an incredibly deep process, I know, for Riz, not only into learning a new language, but also starting to build a relationship in the deaf community with Jeremy, who is an amazingly giving person, and starting to learn the language of sign, which, you know, we can't be like our monotone selves, like in the deaf world, from what I understand, like you have to animate and you have to express in a different way. You can't just say, oh, I'm fine. You know, you have to say how you are in a new way. And it's a different way of communicating from what I could see, and what Darius has spoken so much about is really about true community and communicating in just a very genuine way. And the deaf community is extremely close, and yeah, I don't know. That's just the beginning stages of what I've seen. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question will be from Just Milling About It, Robert Milling.
You're muted.
Robert, you're muted.
Got it. Greetings from New York. Thank you for this great film. And actually, I wanted to quickly follow up about the deaf community. I was wondering if that's an actual place that exists. And I know Lauren Ridloff is deaf, the actress who was in this. And also, if you could quickly talk about the dedication of the film and why that came to be what it was. I just wanted to get a little bit more information. Thanks.
J-Dub, do you want to talk at all about the deaf community?
Sure. The short answer is no. The house that you saw, Joe's house, and that sort of facility, that community, that's an invention for the movie. We found an old farmhouse that had been used as dormitories for interns supporting a sort of national park or state park sort of area, and so it already had this sort of imprint of communal living with kind of near strangers that we sort of enhanced and worked with. So that's a creation, and the deaf school is actually a creation as well, which is not to say that many of those don't exist, but the one that we were in, that was a church that we converted. So no, those were inventions for the movie. I hope they were convincing. But it was, yeah. So that's the answer to that.
I think what wasn't an invention was, Darius was just showing me some footage of throughout the film, some of the moments of just, Riz and everyone sitting around a table at night. and signing and talking. And what was so clear is the relationships were all real. I think that's everyone in the film has been pretty blown away by how true all the relationships are. And I think what hopefully people feel from the deaf community is that, as portrayed in that community that Riz and Ruben were a part of, is that it's all incredibly genuine and those relationships were really built and lived, and people loved being there with each other.
Yeah, I mean, people definitely hung hard in that house. I mean, it was like the deaf cast really cemented together and became close and became friends and spent a lot of time there. So living in that house had a sort of, it started to grow this other sort of sense of itself, even beyond as a set. It was really a place where this, this community sort of started to coalesce.
And the dedication, was that your grandmother?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
can you talk about that?
Well, she, we watched her for years. She was, part of the deaf or hard of hearing community that maybe doesn't get talked about as much, but she could just barely hear a little of something sometimes, but she felt completely alienated in her life because she wasn't completely a part of the deaf world, but she certainly wasn't a part of the hearing community. And she really locked herself away for many years, the last part of her life, because she felt so alienated. She had to wear a system where she had a headphone, and she would try to give someone a mic to talk to her, but we would go have Thanksgiving at her house, and she had to, bring you over to a corner to be able to hear at all clearly, what was happening through the microphone. And she was a cinephile. So all she ever wanted was to see, proper captioning in all films in cinema. So that was like her greatest wish. So a lot of things came together with this story kind of through her, and it happened through years where we didn't really know that's what we were doing, but near the end, we kind of realized there were so many parts of her that came through in this story. So that's why it's so clearly dedicated to her.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Great. Our next question is for Alessandra at La Estudia.
Hello, yes, this question is for Megan Stark. I wanted to know about the way the costumes help to explore the evolution of Lou's character. For example, this is evident when Ruben is watching a video of her performing in Paris, and we can't hear her, but we understand all of her change because of the way she looks and dresses. Thank you.
Well, to begin with, we actually, I was the costume designer for the part of the movie where you see the whole beginning and through the deaf community. But once they go to Paris, it was actually a different costume designer who did that segment. And I thought she did such a great job of adding the evolution to Lou's character. So I can't really take credit for Lou in the very end of the film, but I can talk about Lou in the beginning. And what Olivia and I spoke a lot about, and Darius and I, was how Lou would use clothing as protection. So whether she was wearing Ruben's clothing to feel that she was kind of protected and connected to Ruben, or she had all those big rings, which is kind of adds as like a protective talisman and something she can, mess with when she's, when she just is an action for her to feel and live into while she's exploring that character. Her oversized clothing covering her body. And then when she goes into her performance scenes, she actually ends up in a very different looking costume, which is this slip. And the slip came about when Darius and I were talking about the experience that she had had with her mother, which was so painful. Her experience of her mother committing suicide and all the pain that she still holds on to from that. We had said, well, maybe she would actually be paying tribute to her mother through her music while she's performing by wearing an old slip of her mom's. So we kind of delved into that, and So it's this sort of beyond the grave connection with her mother. And it's also a physical embodiment of her being laid bare by her music and showing a lot more skin while she's performing, but not really in any other time in the film, except maybe when she and Ruben are in their own space in that Airstream, which was so masterfully designed by Jeremy. Does that kind of answer?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Our next question comes from Emmanuel at LRM Online.
Hello, I'm really curious about, you guys already talked about a lot of the sounds you guys had to do after shooting and with different microphones in different ways. I want to know about post-production and how the challenges maybe in putting that together to make the final shot. Is there something maybe that worked better than you guys thought, something that didn't? And what was that process like?
BK, maybe you...
I mean, they shot it chronological. The way they shot it, it was interesting to see the whole arc of the whole film. And it was very important that the first shot and the last shot would be almost identical, but very different. Then the whole idea of how do we get into a head and how do we work with Ruben as a character where we somehow get into his head, and how do we work with the angles from how much do we actually have to see of sign language, and do we have to be in medium close-ups, or can we actually go into close-ups so we don't see the sign language all the time? That was super interesting. And just like Alexandra just asked, that she looks at Lou in Paris, but she looks at her movement and the way that she is performing completely different from what she also already saw in the concert beforehand, because the sound is not there. That was something we worked throughout the whole film. Like, when do we need to be inside of Ruben's head and when do we need to be outside? And how much information do we actually need to understand? Like, first time we go into the pharmacy, we kind of need to know that he's being sent to a doctor. Otherwise, we don't know who this person is. So we need just one silent piece of a wide shot where we just hear the word doctor. And then we completely understand what we're being sent to. That was super, super interesting throughout the whole film with you, Nicolas, right? To go, I worked a lot with the film like a silent movie to see how much do we actually need to see in the film. Just cut off the whole sound and then suddenly you understand I do actually need to feel this scene or this scene, or at least understand some small part of it, or this I can actually already see everything in the screen or on the image, or it's in his eyes or the whole movements.
Yeah. For me, in terms of collaboration, it has been the more interesting collaboration of my life in terms of how to work, closely with the picture editor, and the fact that it's not happening after, the picture editing, but it was also a work which have been like before, during, after, and I think like what was great, it was like, like normally the sound is not always treated well in the kind of work in the film, but the fact that it was a topic brings the sound, a bit more into the game. And I think that it's, and also of course it's you are like that, you like to it's because of you, BK, but I mean that it's question, I would like now on the other film I'm working with, I really try to push that, because I'm thinking it's not about pushing the sound, it's just like, be able to make a film much more strong and much more various, and the fact that also most of the music is diegetic, is also something. I mean, it's something also we can share because we are European, So we used to work with film with less music, you know, but I think it's also something which is very rare in American film to have so much additional music, you know. So you can really be in contact with the sound of the film, you know, like the objects, the atmosphere, the even the buzz of, you know, like you immerse into the in a kind of naturalistic sound.
Yeah,
And
and
also,
yeah, sorry, you go on, Michael.
sorry, Abraham, also just to, because what you talked about, Nell, Minno, you asked about these sounds where we worked in the whole opening of, it had to be this extremely intense concert, and then you cut to silence inside of an Airstream. Then you go to like the close-up of that thing where he makes smoothie, and then you go out, then you go to an air duster, then you go out. You go to the extremes all the time just to awaken all the senses in the audience. So you feel like, okay, I might hear something strange, but these guys try at least, or they try to hold my hand, and I might hear something, because there was an extremely important moment in the film, which was actually what, in the editorial way, we worked a lot with, which is to how do we get that inner emotional journey from when Ruben has known that and told Lou that he can't hear anything, but we have that whole arc or that travel to Joe's place. That has to be an internal emotional journey. So you hear all the different edits and the sounds as his state of mind, and you enter that Joe place just in complete, like all these sounds, and suddenly you hear the nature, and suddenly you hear all these different things. That was like a key to the whole film, to try and find that, because otherwise you would put like music on, and that could be an emotion of whatever, you know, how music works. But it was just super interesting to work saying like, we don't really work with music, except there's one scene where music would come, and that would be the piano, or you would have the piano piece where all the kids lie their hands on it. And then we have that whole opening of the concert and the piano piece in the end. That's basically what we have of music from editorial wise, how I see it. Of course, there's a lot of interesting drones or art, but those should be internal, emotional sounds of that whole music thing, which you worked on, Nicolas and Abraham. I mean, you can probably talk more about that, the music way, but it shouldn't feel like music. We didn't work with it at like music should add something to the scenes, for example.
Yeah, I think
much more feel like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you asked about the post-production and what really was needing to be added, and that's exactly what happened. Is we made a ton of music, and we put it in the film, and we kept making music and putting it in the film. And I think the biggest thing was slowly taking everything away, and taking this away and taking this away, so that you could really hear and you could really see the story, and you could feel that it's a natural voyage you're on. And then when perspective hits, or when a somewhat impacting sound perspective hits, you feel it in a different way. And, you know, in terms of me and Nicolas, we worked with many instruments. Nicolas worked with the crystal vachet, which is, you know, really feels like the inner ear to us, and is incredibly vibrational, beautiful instrument. And I worked with my resophonic guitar, which is a steel guitar with steel cones in it. And we use these EBOs to create these big vibrational sounds that really, again, reminded us of the inner ear. But never always the score coming from deaf perspective, and not trying to sweep you up in an emotional perspective that is outside of Ruben's internal. So very specific, very sparse. And I will say though, with post-production, that in terms of sound, the mix was massive. How long was that, Nicholas? Was that like 22 weeks or something?
Yeah, the mixing was very long. Yeah, I mean, like I even didn't have the chance to finish it because it was like very long, but it was amazing because we had the chance to work with a great guy, you know, like Jaime, which have mixed a lot of great film, and it was so nice to be. And also, what was great that we did the first part of the film, which is very noisy, and it's like in the city, and it's like there's this music, and we did that in LA in a music studio. So we were actually experiencing that, you know, kind of environment when we were doing it. And then for the end of the movie, we moved to like Carlos Regala's facilities in the middle of the mountain in pure silence. So we also kind of did the same trajectory a bit, you know, that's the main character, you know. So it was like a kind of, everything was so connected, you know, between that's something amazing, and that's something which is very important, and something I learned from me on my side from the working with artists, you know, conceptual artists, that the gesture is as important as the quest, and it was so important for the film because it's exactly the meaning of the film, you know. So I think it was like for all of us, it was like an amazing experience also, you know, to see that it was a kind of small utopia, you know, like because between what we were doing and living and what the film was talking about was so much connected, you know, it was like one, you know. So I think for me it's there is my life before this film, and after I can't, you know, I have to do something now. I have to integrate that, and I have to deal with it. Now I'm working, you know, I can't kind of say like, no, it didn't happen. I have to, you know, it changed things in my way of working.
Great. And on that note, this is the end of the press conference. I want to thank everybody for joining us today.